Good morning and welcome to Peace Out, where we are all learning together to just peace out, right? It's an everyday thing. God should have talked to us about some design issues. There should just be a button, right, that you could just push and go, hey, this is cool. Now we got peace forever. But he kind of did that. He just left it up to us to keep that button pushed, right, and to keep going back to him. That's really cool. That's a really cool design because we need him so much. He designed us to need him, and that's cool, right? Anyway, lots on my mind this morning before I get too far into it. This week's book of the week, Making of a Leader, 1,800 copies. The last 300 is at the fourth printing, and we only did 300 this time because we're trying to publish a couple of other books over there too. So we're trying to spread those funds out as they come in. But anyway, Making of a Leader, 1,800 copies by the end of next week will have been printed, and that's our book of the week. Grab it. Learn about the leaders in the Bible, which actually provide us some examples of leadership, right? And examples is exactly what we're going to talk about today. Here's where I found myself this morning. In Hebrews 12:1 says this, therefore. Now, I will say this. Anytime you see a therefore in the scriptures, you need to see what it's there for, right? But we'll go back to that in a second. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge cloud of witnesses to the life of faith, that's powerful right there by itself. Let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sins that so easily hinders our progress. And let us run with endurance the race that God has set before us. That's the first two verses of Hebrews 12. He says, since we have all these witnesses, my first thing is, what witnesses? You have to look back at chapter 11. You go back to chapter 11, and there's a long list of people who trusted God. And they trusted God in adverse circumstances. They trusted God through hard situations. They trusted God through famine and through all kinds of crazy stuff, right? He talks about Abraham and Sarah and how they believed what God said, even though in the natural it was totally impossible. But it happened, so it wasn't impossible, right? It was God possible. And so God gave them a child in their old age, and there was Joseph, and there's Moses, all these heroes of faith, right? And even down in verse 32 of chapter 11 of Hebrews, he says, how much more do I need to say? It would take too long. It would take too long to recount the stories of faith of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and all the prophets. By faith, these people, they conquered things. They faced stuff. That's what the therefore is there for. Therefore, this cloud of witnesses, these people that were able to walk with God and trust God through difficult circumstances. Some lived as captives. David ran from Saul for all those years. There's just so many things if we go back and read all those different stories of how they just trusted God. And so since we have this cloud of witnesses, right, let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. And now listen to this. Here's verse 2. That's all verse 1. Verse 2 says this, we do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus. So he tells us what to do. He says, look at the cloud of witnesses. Look at all these people and all these people who have lived in faith before faith was cool. So we have this whole list of people who conquered. It says they conquered kingdoms. They conquered, they ruled with justice, overthrew kingdoms, received what God had promised them, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the flames of... They did some crazy stuff, man. They did stuff we're not going to face a hungry den of lions, thank God, right? We're not going to cross the Red Sea on dry ground. We don't have to do those things. But we have these witnesses how God kept them through their difficulties. God did not prevent the difficulties. And sometimes that's where we get it. We think, see, if the point was just to get saved, we would get saved and then die. We would just get saved and go to our reward. But we want to get saved. Don't get me wrong. That's the whole evangelistic message. We want to preach Jesus. We want to preach so that no one is lost, so that everyone comes to trust in God, right? Of course, but that's not the end point. Otherwise, it would just be, you say a prayer, and then you just give up the ghost and go be with Jesus. But that's not the point. The point is to develop that relationship of trust, that relationship of faith. And even all these Old Testament characters give us those examples. None of them there's not a button you get saved and now nothing's ever going to go wrong again. Boy, that would be nice. So, see, there's another design issue God should ask me about, right? I don't know. Anyway, but it's not that we get saved, we trust God, and then nothing bad ever happens again. It's that we trust God when bad things happen, and we trust God when bad things don't happen. The whole point of this is building a relationship with the God who created all of this. That God wants a relationship with us. These people we read about in Hebrews 11, they had a relationship with God. And it says let's see, what does it say? They are witnesses of a life of faith. They just kept trusting God. If they came up to the Red Sea, if they lost their children, if they were thrown into a hungry den of lions, if they walked through the fire, if they walked through the wilderness, if they lived in a famine, it didn't matter. They just went back to God. That's our example, and that's what we're supposed to do. And that's where we find the peace of God. So we just keep going back. So he says, we do this. How do we live a life of faith like they did? We do this. I love that. I love those three words, because sometimes it says, just trust God, or just do this, or just do that. And you're like, well, I'm not really sure how to apply that in my life, right? I'm not really sure how that actually walks out in my day-to-day life. But he says this. He says, let us run with endurance the race that God has set before us. We do this by, I love that. We do this by keeping our eyes on him. We are very aware of our circumstances. Just because we have our eyes on him doesn't mean our circumstances go away. Just because we have our eyes on him doesn't mean, everything worked out perfectly all in 1 second. Everything's all taken care of. But it will, over time, work out as he works out those things out of us that don't need to be there. That I think it's just a premise. It's just a thought. But I think Joseph spent all those years in prison working things out of him, right? God worked on Joseph because Joseph had that relationship. He had that. We can tell at the end when he told his brothers, you meant this for evil, but God brought me here. Could he say that about that journey? That was a hard journey. God brought me here to save you, is what he said in the end. He had to have had a relationship with God. His brothers betrayed him, sold him into slavery. He lived as a slave. He got promoted as a slave. He got promoted as a slave. He got lied on as a slave. He got thrown into prison unjustly as a slave. Now he's a prisoner. He had to identify as a slave, as the one who was betrayed. Then he had to identify as a prisoner, and he didn't even do anything wrong. And yet he said, God brought me through all of this. And that's what we have to do, is look back and go. We can look back over our lives already and go, God brought me through this. He brought me through that. He brought me through something else. And he's going to keep bringing me through. My point is to just keep my eyes on him. Keep my heart toward him. Work on that relationship with God by prayer, through Bible study, through fellowship. Because we only have fellowship with one another as we have fellowship with Christ, right? And so when we get all these elements going together, we encourage ourselves like David did. I'm going to encourage myself in the Lord. These guys all had to have encouraged themselves in the Lord. Joseph didn't have another Hebrew believer. There wasn't anybody there that believed in God like he did. Daniel didn't either. As a matter of fact, if you remember when Daniel was thrown in the lion's den, I'm trying to hurry, I'm sorry, right? The king came the next day and said, oh, Daniel, did your God save you? And Daniel said, it's all cool. You can peace out, king, because my God was in the lion's den with me. He didn't prevent the lion's den, but he went through it with me. That's the whole thing. We have a list of people that God walked through hard circumstances with. So no matter what you're facing today, God's walking through it with you. You're not alone. He is with you, and you can win. Keep your eyes on him and peace out, right? Have a great day. I'll see you guys tomorrow.